By the end of this story, one thing about Chris Evert should look completely different. Her calm was not just a personality trait, it was a competitive system. It was built in practice, protected under pressure, and tested for years by the one opponent who forced her to become more than the ice queen of the baseline. Martina Navratilova did not simply challenge Evert's record, she challenged the entire logic of Evert's game. That is what makes their rivalry so fascinating. It was not only a clash of two great players, it was a clash between control and explosion, patience and attack, emotional containment and athletic reinvention. Evert made tennis look clean, almost inevitable. Navratilova made it look urgent and physical. For a long stretch of women's tennis, the question was not just who would win. The question was, which version of greatness would survive? Chris Evert's image was simple from the outside. The face barely changed. The shoulders stayed level. The eyes went back to the next ball. Win a point, lose a point. Get broken, break back. The expression stayed close to the same. That composure became part of her myth. The nickname Ice Maiden followed her because audiences and journalists saw someone who seemed almost impossible to rattle. But that nickname can be misleading. Ice can sound cold. Evert's game was not cold. It was controlled. There is a difference. Cold suggests distance. Controlled suggests work. Her greatest strength was not that she felt nothing. It was that she gave opponents so little evidence of what she felt. And in tennis, that matters. Tennis is one of the loneliest sports in the world. There is no teammate to hide behind. No coach walking onto the court after every mistake. No play clock that resets the emotions. You miss, everyone sees it. You walk back, you serve again. If panic appears on your face, the opponent can feel it. Evert understood that early. She grew up in a tennis environment where repetition was not punishment. It was the language of the game. Her father, Jimmy Evert, was a respected coach, and the foundation he helped build in her was simple but brutal. Make one more ball, then make another, then make the next one under stress. Her strokes were not designed to create chaos. They were designed to remove it. The two-handed backhand became one of her signatures. Today, it looks normal. In her early years, it still carried a sense of distinction. It gave her stability, especially from the baseline, and it helped her drive the ball with precision. But the stroke alone was not the secret. The secret was the discipline around it. Evert did not need to make the spectacular shot if the percentage shot would break the opponent's patience. She could hit deep, repeat the pattern, and wait for the opening. Many players wanted to end points. Evert often seemed willing to let points reveal themselves. That made her dangerous in a quiet way. Opponents did not always lose to one winner. They lost to accumulation. A slightly shorter ball, a forced adjustment, a defensive shot that landed a little too high, a rally that lasted 3 shots longer than they wanted. Evert made opponents feel that nothing was free. If they wanted to beat her, they had to earn it over and over again. Her rise came fast enough to shock the tennis world, but not in a way that looked chaotic. As a teenager, she was already being treated as someone different. At the U.S. Open in the early 1970s, she reached deep into the tournament while still very young, and the public saw a new kind of American tennis star. Not loud, not theatrical, not physically overwhelming, but frighteningly steady. She did not look like she was chasing the match. The match seemed to come to her. That impression only grew as she became a dominant force. Evert won 18 Grand Slam singles titles across her career, a number that still places her among the giants of the sport. Her record at the French Open became especially legendary. On clay, where patience, footwork, and precision are punished or rewarded with unusual clarity, Evert was almost perfectly suited. Official records credit her with one of the most remarkable clay court winning streaks ever recorded, a run that stretched across several seasons and became a symbol of her command over the surface. Clay rewards the player who can suffer without showing it. It slows the ball, stretches the rally, and makes impatience expensive. For Evert, that was home territory. Her discipline was not just useful there, it was magnified. She could build points like a builder laying bricks. One measured shot, then another, until the structure trapped the opponent. But if Evert had only been a clay court specialist, her story would be smaller. She was not. She won on grass, hard courts, and clay. She won in different conditions and across different phases of the sport. She was not the most physically explosive player of her generation, but she was one of the most complete competitors. Her completeness came from refusing to give away cheap mistakes. She made the court feel narrower for opponents because she placed the ball where risk became unavoidable. And then came Martina Navratilova. At first, the rivalry did not look like the perfectly balanced duel it later became. Evert was more established, more polished, more reliable. Navratilova had immense talent, but her game and body were still evolving. She was a left-hander with natural attacking instincts, a player drawn forward, a player who could use the whole court in a different way. Where Evert's tennis often began with structure, Navratilova's promised disruption. The contrast was obvious. Evert was the baseline ruler, the steady metronome. Navratilova was the serve and volley force, the athlete who wanted to take time away. Evert seemed to stretch points until the opponent cracked. Navratilova wanted to compress points until the opponent had no time to think. Evert controlled space through depth and accuracy. Navratilova controlled space by moving forward and cutting off angles. That is why their rivalry became more than a scoreboard. It became a tennis argument. If Evert could keep Martina back, Evert's world made sense. If Martina could get forward, the geometry changed. The rally became less about endurance and more about invasion. Each player was trying to drag the match into her own weather. In the early part of their rivalry, Evert had the advantage. Her consistency punished uncertainty. Against a player still refining her fitness, shot selection, and emotional rhythm, Evert's steadiness could feel suffocating. She did not have to outflash Martina. She had to make Martina hit enough balls to reveal the errors. In those years, Evert's discipline looked like the safer model of greatness. But the central drama of the rivalry is that Navratilova did not remain the same player. She transformed. By the early 1980s, her fitness, strength, movement, and tactical clarity had changed the entire matchup. She became faster, sharper, and more aggressive. Her serve became a weapon not just to start the point, but to shape it. Her volleying turned defensive replies into immediate danger. The old equation no longer held. This is where Evert's ice met its hardest test. It is one thing to stay calm while winning. It is another thing to stay calm while the sport seems to be moving away from you. Navratilova's rise forced Evert to confront something every great champion eventually faces. The habits that made you dominant can become the habits your rival is built to attack. Navratilova's athleticism put pressure on Evert's serve. If the serve did not do enough, Martina could take control quickly. Navratilova's net game put pressure on Evert's passing shots. If Evert's ground strokes landed a fraction short, Martina could close in. Navratilova's left-handed patterns changed the angles and rhythms Evert had mastered against so many others. The court that once seemed to obey Evert now had an intruder at the net. And because both women were so great, the rivalry became relentless. They played each other around 80 times, according to commonly cited records, with Navratilova finishing narrowly ahead overall. That number matters because it is almost unthinkable in modern terms. Today, great rivalries often feel rare, spaced out, shaped by injuries, surfaces, rankings, and tournament draws. Evert and Navratilova met constantly. They met in finals. They met with titles, rankings, and legacy on the line. They had to solve each other not once, but again and again. Imagine the psychological weight of that. You do not prepare for an unknown opponent. You prepare for someone who knows your patterns, your comfort zones, your preferred escapes. She knows the serve you trust under pressure. She knows where you like to recover after a backhand. She knows how you behave after losing a long rally. She has seen your best tennis and survived it. That kind of rivalry strips away illusion. For Evert, the challenge was especially sharp because her public identity was built on control. If Navratilova could overpower or outmaneuver her, the loss did not just affect the ranking, it threatened the image. The Ice Queen was supposed to be unshakable, but Martina was shaking the structure itself. This is where Evert's greatness becomes more interesting than the nickname. If she had been merely calm, she would have faded. Calm alone does not adapt. Calm alone does not solve a left-handed attacker who has become the fittest player in the sport. Evert had to do something harder. She had to keep the discipline that made her great, while changing enough to survive the new terms. She worked to add more to her game. She looked for ways to improve her serve, to take the ball earlier, to move forward when needed, and to avoid being trapped in patterns that Martina could read. She was never going to become Navratilova. That would have been a mistake. The point was not to abandon her identity. The point was to stretch it. This is one of the most useful lessons in the rivalry. Great champions do not adapt by becoming someone else. They adapt by expanding what they already are. Evert's base was still consistency. Her mind was still built around patience. But against Navratilova, patience had to become more active. Waiting for errors was not enough if Martina was ending points at the net. Evert needed to pass better, serve smarter, and choose the right moments to change direction. The rivalry's emotional complexity also grew because Evert and Navratilova were not simple enemies. They were competitors, but they also developed a relationship marked by familiarity and respect. Accounts of their relationship often emphasize that it contained friendship as well as fierce competition. That makes the rivalry more human. It is easy to imagine hatred as fuel. It is harder and more interesting to compete repeatedly against someone you understand, someone who is part of your professional life, someone who may even make you better while taking trophies from you. Their contrast invited easy storytelling. Evert was framed as composed, traditional, polished. Navratilova was framed as bold, physical, and disruptive. Some of those descriptions point to real differences in style, but they can also flatten both women. Evert was not simply conservative. She was ruthless in her own way. Navratilova was not simply wild power. She became one of the most disciplined athletes tennis had seen. The rivalry endures because both women were more complicated than the labels. Still, the labels had power because they matched what viewers could see. On one side, Evert behind the baseline, face still, ball after ball returning deep. On the other, Navratilova charging in, cutting off the court, putting pressure on every reply. You did not need to know tennis theory to understand the tension. One player built the point like a wall. The other tried to break through it before it became too high. During Navratilova's strongest years, Evert absorbed some painful defeats. Those losses matter. They prevent the story from becoming a simple celebration of dominance. Evert had dominated many opponents, but Martina forced her into the unfamiliar position of being chased down and surpassed. For an athlete whose career had been built on reliability, that was a different kind of pressure. The easy version of the story would say Martina modernized the game and Evert represented the past. But that is too simple. Evert was not obsolete. She kept winning. She stayed relevant across years in which the sport became faster, stronger, and more professional. Her results show that she was not merely holding on to an old style. She was continuing to win with a style that demanded extraordinary precision. Some of their most memorable matches came on clay, where Evert could still pull the rivalry toward her strengths. The French Open finals of the mid-1980s are often remembered as crucial chapters because Evert showed that even after Navratilova's transformation, she could still solve the puzzle on the right day, in the right conditions, with the right discipline. Those matches did not erase Martina's edge in the rivalry, but they proved that Evert's game still had answers. That is important because rivalry is not measured only by who finishes ahead. It is measured by how much each player forces from the other. Navratilova forced Evert to evolve. Evert forced Navratilova to become more complete, more fit, more exact. If Martina had faced weaker resistance, perhaps she would still have been great. But Evert gave her a standard that demanded refinement. You could not beat Evert with talent alone. You had to sustain excellence. And Evert, in turn, had to accept that perfection from the baseline was no longer always enough. Against most players, her consistency could be a closing argument. Against Navratilova, it was only the beginning. That is what made the matchup so tense. Both women could take away the other's comfort. Evert could make Martina hit more volleys, more overheads, more low pickups. Martina could make Evert hit passing shots under pressure, again and again, with almost no margin. The physical contrast also reflected a larger change in women's tennis. Evert belonged to an era where precision and mental strength were already essential, but Navratilova helped push the sport toward a new level of athletic preparation. Her emphasis on fitness and strength became part of the sport's future. Evert's response showed that older foundations still mattered. The modern game would not simply be power. It would be power controlled by discipline, movement, and nerve. That is why Evert's legacy cannot be reduced to her number of titles, even though the numbers are enormous. 18 major singles titles, dozens upon dozens of tour titles, years near the top of the rankings, a staggering level of week-to-week consistency. For a long period, if Evert entered a tournament, she was expected to go deep. That expectation can become a cage. Every early round is treated as a formality until it is not. Every opponent plays with nothing to lose. Every audience expects your calm to hold. The fact that it held so often is almost difficult to process. Tennis fans remember dramatic peaks, but careers are built through ordinary days when the great player does not allow the ordinary upset. Evert's greatness lived there, not only in famous finals, but in the discipline to beat the player she was supposed to beat. That is less glamorous than a highlight reel. It is also rarer than it looks. The Ice Queen image can make that discipline seem effortless. It was not. Composure is often mistaken for ease because the struggle is hidden. But hiding the struggle is part of the labor. Evert's face did not show much, but the pressure had to go somewhere. Every champion pays for control. The cost may be emotional, physical, or private. We should be careful about pretending to know exactly what she felt in every moment. But the public record of her career shows a player who carried expectation with unusual steadiness. And then there is the strange gift of having a rival like Navratilova. A rival can be a threat, but also a mirror. Martina showed Evert where the game was going. Evert showed Martina how high the standard already was. Their rivalry gave each woman a clearer outline. Without Martina, Evert might be remembered mainly as the calm champion who dominated through consistency. Without Evert, Martina might be remembered mainly as the attacking genius who changed the athletic demands of the sport. Together, they became a living debate. That debate had texture because surfaces changed the balance. On grass, Navratilova's serve and volley game could look devastating. On clay, Evert's patience and passing shots could become heavier weapons. On hard courts, the matchup could feel like a negotiation between first strike and long-term pressure. Every surface asked the same question in a different accent. Could Evert keep Martina away, or could Martina get in close enough to take control? The answer changed over time, which is why the rivalry stayed alive. If one player had solved it completely, the story would have ended. But there were phases. Evert's early edge, Navratilova's surge, Evert's adaptations, Martina's continued brilliance. The head-to-head record became not just a statistic, but a timeline of evolution. Their rivalry also helped shape how women's tennis was watched. It gave the sport a central drama that casual viewers could understand and serious fans could study. You could enter the story through personality, tactics, nationality, style, or legacy. You could cheer for the cool technician or the attacking athlete. You could see the old champion resisting the new force, then realize the old champion was still too good to be placed in the past. That is the key turn in the story. Chris Evert's calm was never passive. It was not the calm of someone untouched by danger. It was the calm of someone who had trained herself to respond to danger with process. Split step, turn, contact, recover, next ball, next point. That sounds simple until the person across the net is Martina Navratilova, sprinting forward, cutting off angles, and forcing you to hit the perfect shot under the loudest pressure. The rivalry revealed what Evert's discipline could do and what it could not do alone. It could win majors. It could build one of the most consistent careers tennis has seen. It could break the nerve of countless opponents. But when the sport accelerated, discipline had to become flexible. Evert's greatness was that she did not confuse calm with stubbornness. She changed enough to keep fighting without losing the core that made her Chris Evert. That is why her story still matters. Modern tennis is filled with bigger serves, heavier ground strokes, advanced fitness, and constant analysis. But the foundation Evert represented has not disappeared. Every great player still needs the ability to make one more ball when the hands get tight. Every great player still needs emotional control when the match starts to turn. Every great player still needs a pattern that can survive pressure. Navratilova's legacy is often tied to transformation, athleticism, attack, reinvention. Evert's legacy is tied to mastery, consistency, precision, nerve. Their rivalry shows that tennis needs both. Attack without discipline becomes reckless. Discipline without adaptation becomes vulnerable. The greatest rivalries do not just decide who is better, they expose what greatness requires. In the end, the Ice Queen label only captures the surface. Chris Evert was not great because she looked calm. She looked calm because she had built a game that gave her somewhere to go under pressure. The baseline was not just a place on the court, it was her command center. From there, she measured risk, absorbed force, and turned patience into punishment. Martina Navratilova made that command center unsafe. That was her role in the story. She rushed it, stretched it, attacked it, and forced Evert to defend it in new ways. And because Evert responded, the rivalry became one of the defining chapters in women's sport. The takeaway is clear. Evert's greatness was not ice. It was architecture. Point by point, season by season, she built a career out of repeatable choices under pressure. Navratilova tested that architecture like a storm. Some days the storm won. Some days the structure held. But together, they showed why a rivalry can become larger than either player alone. If this story changed the way you see Chris Evert, stay with the channel. The next tennis legend may look familiar on the surface, but the real story is usually hidden in the pressure.